because here in the States, world language education takes a back seat. And so, many of the professionals, not just in the medical field, not just health professionals, but all professionals that, went to school here in the States didn't necessarily get a lot of world language education.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this episode of First Case, we are going to be speaking Spanish with Meghan Codd, owner of Mi Vida Spanish, the whole season, Melanie, dedicated to communication. And obviously, there are many patients who speak different languages, and we're going to be talking about Spanish-speaking patients today. And we're going to get some interesting stats from Meghan on just how important having the ability to communicate with Spanish-speaking patients is becoming, and how it's going to continue to grow in the coming years. And so we're going to get some helpful phrases too.
Yeah, I'm excited. Actually, I have to be honest, Meghan was the inspiration for this whole season. I met her at the OR Manager Conference in October of 2022, and we talked about communication. We talked about the importance of being able to communicate with our Spanish-speaking patients, and that got my gears turning about a season dedicated to communication and really attacking it from a lot of different angles, but you couldn't leave out our ability to communicate with our patients who don't speak English as a primary language. And we run into so many patients who speak Spanish as their first language, as a primary language, that it was just a no-brainer to have her on the show, to interview her and just find out how we can better speak to our patients. It's going to be a great conversation.
All right, we'll be right back speaking Spanish with Meghan Codd.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now to speak Spanish is Meghan Codd, owner of Mi Vida Spanish. And Meghan, interestingly, I think Melanie and I started seeing you on LinkedIn, and little did I know that I interviewed your brother, Dr. Patrick Codd, on another podcast that I do about supply chain, and connected the dots from the last name. It's just kind of a small world out there in social media and healthcare. So wanted to welcome you to the First Case podcast. We're really excited to talk to you today.
Muchas gracias, Justin. Y hola, Melanie. And if my brother's listening, hola, hermano.
This is already great. I think you should definitely mix in Spanish throughout this conversation, because we are going to be talking about how to communicate with Spanish-speaking patients today on this episode. And the whole season is a theme built around communication. But, there are a lot of people that are out there doing nursing who may not be Spanish-speaking today that are definitely coming into contact with a lot of patients who only speak Spanish, not even as a second or first language with an alternate in English. They may literally only speak Spanish. And I think having some tips for all of us out there and just getting maybe some basic terms from you is going to be really exciting for today's conversation. Can you tell us about your background? Like, have you always been able to speak Spanish? Is this something you learned when you were older? What's the background?
So I started learning Spanish like most public school kids in the States at about 13 years old. it was always my favorite subject in school. In my background, my background is in language education and culture education. So I've been teaching language and culture programs for 17 years, but Español es mi favorito. I just fell in love with it. So no, I'm not a native speaker, but I love the language and I love how useful it is in the States. That's one of the reasons why I've kept going with it and made a career out of it and just kept studying it throughout my education.
So here's a question I have just real quick about, have you gone to countries where the native language is Spanish, and how did that differ from the way that you learned it sort of in your schooling initially to then using it fluently in the culture itself?
Oh, it was an adventure. Yes, I've lived in Chile. I've lived in Spain. I've also lived in Italy, where I used my Spanish as well because it's very closely related to Italian. And then I've lived in Boston and I've lived in California and I've lived here in Colorado. And all of these places are places where I've encountered Spanish, but different types of Spanish, right? Because what you learn in school, depending on the region where you are, it may be a certain type of Spanish. It may have a Mexican Spanish flavor, or it may have a Caribbean Spanish flavor, depending on what the influences are that your teachers have had. But it's so different when you're experiencing the language in an immersion experience, like in a study abroad or living abroad or working abroad experience. So it was a shock at first that what I was experiencing when I studied abroad in Spain or when I was living abroad in Chile was not what I learned in school. Like, that's not the vocab that I learned and how I learned to use it in that sentence. And that's not the speed that we were speaking in school, like the rapid fire. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
So it was an adjustment, but best experiences I've had. I mean, Spanish has taken me all over the world, virtually all over the world, and my teaching experience, and then also physically as I've lived in different countries.
Okay, so I want to ask before we dive more into the meat of this conversation. I've seen some posts on LinkedIn about your abuelo and his influence in your Spanish. Tell me a little bit more about him, or tell our audience about his influence and why you loved Spanish like you did.
I think he's been abuelo for me for the past 15 years at least. He's my very first Spanish student. I don't call him papi anymore. I call him abuelo, and even other members of my family call him abuelo. He is 95 years old. He's a retired family physician, practiced here in Colorado, and always wanted to be able to speak Spanish with his Spanish-speaking patients, but never had the opportunity to learn the language, work on the language while he was practicing. And so one of his projects in retirement was to learn Spanish. And that's where I came in, because that was, I loved Spanish. I was starting to teach Spanish, and he was my first Spanish student was also a healthcare provider. So he has kind of inspired me to reach out to other healthcare providers. And also my grandma was a nurse. So I have a medical family background, but really it was my grandpa that first, got me thinking about, wow, this language is so useful, not just for traveling, not just for, ordering at a restaurant. So this language is useful for health, for helping people, and not on the other side of the world, but right here in the States, right where you're working every day.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And as we talk about this, and as I was thinking about this conversation, I just kind of hearkened back to my very first nursing experience. And I got my license. I was working in Watsonville, California, predominantly a migrant community. I would go to work and I couldn't talk to my patients because my patients did not speak English. A lot of them didn't speak Spanish either, for that matter, but Spanish was the closest that we had to communicate with them. And having to learn very quickly, asking about pain, asking about anything really that they needed became very difficult because I couldn't communicate with them. And I can see just the the value in being able to just communicate on a basic level with your patient so you really know how to take care of them. And it hit home very quickly for me in the beginning part of my nursing career because I couldn't do it. I mean, I really learned real quick, quale su dolor. Hold on, I said that wrong. Hold on. Tiene su dolor, correct? Es correcto?
Tiene dolor.
Yeah, tiene dolor or cuál es su dolor, right? Where is your pain, right? And so we would talk about pain a lot, but beyond that, if I didn't have somebody helping me, I was like, I don't know what we're talking about. So it's just, there's a huge value in this conversation.
And I think there's a huge gap too, because here in the States, world language education takes a back seat. And so, many of the professionals, not just in the medical field, not just health professionals, but all professionals that, went to school here in the States didn't necessarily get a lot of world language education. So we have that gap between the reality on the ground of the people you're serving and your language background. And it comes to a head in an industry where you are directly serving patients every day. You're with people. You need to communicate efficiently and quickly. But I think it's especially acute here in the States because compared to other countries, we don't really start language education at a young age. It's English all the way through, but you may get, another language mixed in there when you're 13, 14, maybe earlier, depending on your school, but it's not a standard by any means.
I'm feeling like the earlier you start, it actually really helps your brain. And it is with all growth and development this way, I'm sure, but it really helps your brain understand language better, right? Like getting exposed to multiple languages actually helps you understand language inherently better, English or otherwise, like syntax and the way, doesn't it help people understand the connotation behind the way things are said better when they learn multiple languages?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of research about if you know more than one language, you also have the tools to look at a situation, a problem, a challenge from multiple angles because you have the skills because you were studied a language, several different ways to say something. So it transfers over to several different ways to solve a problem or to look at a different perspective. So absolutely. It's not just that you can speak the words in a different language. It also gives you a different perspective. And if, encountering people and learning from people that speak another language, you get a whole nother cultural perspective. So absolutely, it's valuable in so many ways.
One of the things that you said earlier was that when you went to some of the other countries and, you were kind of speaking fluently in the culture, that the first thing that struck you was how quickly they would speak. And so I'm just kind of thinking somebody who hasn't had any real education other than maybe what we get through junior high and high school, some exposure to Spanish. Outside of that, if they're trying to understand a little bit better, do you have any ideas or tips for how to deal with a Spanish speaking patient who is obviously going to be maybe speaking much more quickly than their rudimentary knowledge of the language might allow for them to understand?
That's such a good question because that's one of the first things that my clients, that my healthcare professionals that I work with say. I just can't understand what they're saying. It's so fast. And it's because you're speaking with a native speaker. It's not like you're in a language class or it's a teacher that will slow it down for you. So yeah, there's a lot of strategies for just making sure that your patient or patient family member, whoever it is that you're talking with, let them know that you speak a little bit of Spanish. Ask them if they speak any English, because remember that in this country, English and Spanish are always in constant contact. So they may speak a little bit of English or at least understand. And also ask them to slow down because they may not be used to speaking at a slower speed or working with someone that doesn't speak Spanish natively. Yeah, just letting them know you speak a little bit and to slow it down. So do you want to know how
I'm
to
gonna
say
hack
that?
it. I was gonna say I want to hack it first. I want to do the hack job, and then I want you to correct me. So the way I think I would say I speak a little bit of Spanish, I would say something like "Me habla pequeño español." What's the right way to say it?
That was pretty good, Justin. You had some of the right words in there. Muy bien.
Yeah. Okay, so they would forgive
a nice
me
way of saying you didn't say it all right.
I definitely know, but that's not the way they would say it.
But I bet you would be understood, and that's the most important part. Because Spanish communication isn't about perfection, it's about connection.
Oh, I
Ooh,
like
I
that.
like that.
That's good.
So do you want to know? Do you want to know like
I
the
do.
pro version?
Yes.
The Justin Espanol 2.0? Okay. Hablo poco español.
That's even easier than what I tried to put together.
Sí,
Hablo
señor.
poco
Poco
español. Okay.
Oh, let's hear that again. That was good, you two.
Habla poco
Hablo poco
español.
español.
Oh,
Muy bien.
Melody, way better.
I've had a few years of Spanish. It's just been a while since I've used it, and so I have to dust the cobwebs off in my brain and think. But okay.
Oh, and you wanted to know slower, right?
Yes. How do you say it? Or you just ask your patient to, I do understand a little bit, but could you speak slowly so I could try to understand better or something like that?
Okay, so we're going to say, speak slowly, please. I want to understand. Okay. Por favor, hable lento.
Oh, okay. Hable lento.
That's it. Por favor, hable lento.
Hable lento.
That's please speak slowly.
Okay.
Or if you want, you can use despacio. Hable despacio.
What's
Do you
that?
remember Despacito, the song Despacito a few years ago? Justin, you're giving me a blank look.
I have no idea.
Despacito. No? Okay, no. Nope. Then you're going to use lento, Justin. Hable lento.
I'm all about hable lento.
You can Google it after the
This
show.
is fun. I am really enjoying this one.
Oh, and there was another part to that. Por favor, hable lento. Quiero entender.
Entender. To understand, right?
Exacto.
Quiero entender.
Quiero entender.
Almost. I botched that.
I want to understand. I hear that. Okay.
You can do that one. Entender.
Entender.
Perfecto.
ER. Yeah. Entender.
Entender. 3 syllables.
Although she's better at rolling her R's.
Yeah, the rolling thing is where I
The
struggle.
rolling can come later.
Okay.
It comes with practice, right?
Yep. It's all
And
right.
actually, maybe I should take a time out and let our audience know as we're working through these phrases and as we're talking through these. Meghan has very kindly offered a cheat sheet that we will be able to include on the app as a free download. So you'll be able to see some of these phrases and some of these words, and you can download them and you can put them to use, and you can hear the expert herself saying them so that you can put them into practice. So don't feel like you have to catch it all as we're saying it, but you get to hear it, and then later you can download those words and learn them. All right, so I actually want to dive into a little bit of the Spanish-speaking population that we actually do see in the States. Are there any percentages of how many patients don't speak English as a primary language or speak Spanish solely that we would run into in healthcare?
Well, as far as exact figures on that, I'm not sure. But for the Hispanic population in the States, it is at at least about 20% right now, and expected to be at 30% by 2050. So the U.S., it's expected that the U.S. will be the largest Spanish-speaking nation in the world by 2050. Meaning the most Spanish speakers in the world. That may mean the Spanish speakers are only Spanish speaking. It may mean they speak some Spanish. It may mean that they are bilingual, trilingual, have other languages, but biggest Spanish-speaking country, meaning most number of Spanish speakers in the world.
Wow,
Kind of
by
mind-boggling,
2050.
huh?
Yeah, that's crazy.
But, I was looking at some U.S. Census numbers, and I think these are 2020 numbers, that about 28.4% of Hispanic people living in the States don't speak English fluently. So just because you are, Hispanic, which means you have cultural roots, family roots in Latin America or Spain, just because you are Hispanic doesn't mean that you speak Spanish. I have to be clear about that. In the States, you may not speak Spanish, but just the figure that from the Hispanic population in the States, there is a fair amount, getting toward 30%, that don't, or what was this? That 28% that don't speak fluent English. So that's definitely going to transfer over to healthcare. And you've seen it, Melanie. You've already seen it. And, the clients that I work with are the ones that are seeing it every day. In Spanish in the Nurses Lounge, which is a Facebook group we have, the nurses that are there are not just from major coastal cities where you might expect a higher only Spanish-speaking population. Spanish, the nurses that are wanting to learn Spanish, they're in our group: Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois, Virginia, North Carolina, Connecticut, Georgia. And these are not places that you think, okay, yeah, I'm going to need to know Spanish. It's not just the coastal cities. This is a nationwide language.
Absolutely. And I live in Alabama, and it is the Hispanic population is just growing leaps and bounds in the state of Alabama. I know that we do have a coastline, but it's not the state you think of when you think of huge Hispanic population, and yet we really do, and it is growing. And we see at least one patient who speaks Spanish every single day. If not more. So it's like it's an issue that we need to address. We need to be able to communicate with our patients, and just assuming that we can speak English louder and slower and they're going to understand it is not the way this works. Although I'm sure we've all seen people try to just speak louder and slower and think that people are going to understand. And we know that's not true.
Well, and so there's interpreter services, right? The family members may be coming with the patients as well. I know a lot of the interpreter services, at least for Spanish, one of the nice things is it's a very predominant language. So finding an interpreter is not as difficult as it is with some of the lesser common languages. And I've even seen a lot of services out there where the interpreters have to be brought in virtually for that reason. And there's big services out there. But honestly, lining up an interpreter is not necessarily the most expedient way to deliver care, which is also an issue, especially in an emergent situation. I remember I was still working as a CNA on a rehab floor, and this was in Maine. So again, there were some Hispanic workers that were working on the blueberry fields. The truck dumped over and they had head injuries, and 3 of them were on our unit. And, also not only spoke, Spanish, but they also had a head injury. So they weren't even really here. And I got caught on an overnight shift. A patient was in one of those net beds. You might remember those, Melanie. And, you couldn't restrain them. Uh-huh. Yeah, you couldn't restrain them. So he woke up at 4 a.m. I was working the overnight shift and was kind of banging the bed around. So I had to unzip it. And then my job was to basically follow him around. Well, if we didn't wind up making it through several units, down a set of stairs, and out onto a patio where he started to try to climb over the edge of something that was about 40 feet up, I got in his way, but I had the hospital was empty. So I had not a lot of access points to get assistance. Then we wound up walking out the main entrance, and that at that point, security was able to kind of come and help me. And I think just the fact that he recognized that they were an authority figure changed everything, and we got him back to the unit safely. But I had this book out where I was trying to tell him what I needed to tell him. And, there was no way I was going to call in an interpreter in that situation. I wasn't fluent enough at all and had limited training. And I had this book. And so no family members were going to be there to help me at 4 a.m. I think that story kind of it describes why we all need to be a little more aware of this. But why couldn't we just rely on the family outside of like maybe this bizarre situation that I found myself in?
Oh, well, that's a thanks for sharing that. I haven't heard a story quite like that one yet.
I've got so many stories.
Wow. You were flipping through the paper dictionary
the
as
book.
you were.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
But it didn't change the fact that he had a head injury, so it probably didn't even matter.
Right.
Because I think he was pretty disoriented in general. So.
But going back to your question about the family, why can't you just pull in the family? One, logistics, as you mentioned, Justin. The family or friends or neighbors, whoever is accompanying, may not be there, one, at the time of day, if it's a late night shift. But two, in a situation like peri-op, you can't have the family there in the pre-op, in the operating room, in the post-op. That's not, that's hospital policy, right? You can't have the family right there. And in an operating room, you're most likely not going to have access to an in-person interpreter in there. You may not have the Wi-Fi or the language line connection that you need if you need to be accessing translation devices. And you're in a very quick timeline. You have to get things communicated and done very quickly. So being able to communicate the basic ideas is so very helpful. And having a family member as a translator anyway, even if that were an option, is really a big liability because you don't know, a family member isn't a certified interpreter, medical interpreter. You don't know what the relationship is like between the family member and that patient. Is this a good relationship? Is this a strained relationship? What's going to be translated or what's going to be communicated and what's not going to be communicated, you don't know. So it becomes a big liability. And sometimes kids or children or sons, daughters are, the ones to be doing the translating. That's a really hard place to be in as a child, to have to translate for your parent or for your grandparents medical information that, a child, they may not understand what's going on, how to translate that. And there's just so many reasons why that can be problematic in getting clear communication across. And, the work that I do, it's not to replace a medical interpreter. I have the most high respect for medical interpreters. They work very hard. Their work is very difficult, and they have a lot to do. They're running from one appointment to the next. They don't always make it there on time. Their bookings are constant. I have a friend here in Denver who's a medical interpreter, and she is exhausted. She just has to go home and take a nap at the end of her shift because there's so much demand. But the point is for a healthcare provider that may not speak Spanish fluently like a medical interpreter who's highly trained, to be able to at least help the patient, especially in a peri-op situation, calm the patient. It's a high stress. Patient's anxiety is high. And imagine, you're already stressed because you're going into a surgery and you don't have the way to communicate. Are you going to be able to say something in English? All of the barriers that come up to you being able to communicate a need, and for the provider to be able to feel like they're helping. They're being able to do their job. It's just peace of mind, not only for the patient, but for the provider too, to be able to provide that Spanish language communication, even at a basic level, when an interpreter isn't available.
Yeah, no, it's important, I think, to put ourselves in the patient's, put ourselves in the patient bed, so to speak, because from their perspective, if they don't speak any English or have very little understanding of English, they don't know what's going on around them. They'll hear the conversations, but we have the benefit of knowing the language, of understanding what's being said, and they don't. And it can be very disorienting and very terrifying to not know what's happening. So I want to walk into pre-op, or I want you to walk into pre-op with me, and I'm going to go get my patient for surgery. And I need to talk to them, but they speak Spanish. I don't. How can I make sure that I can at least say some basic things to them to get them from pre-op to the OR. And then when they're waking up, get them from the OR to the recovery room. Really just starting with telling them who I am. How would I tell them that?
That's really important because that's one of those cultural things that you need to introduce yourself. It's important to do a greeting. It may seem like a formality, but it's not. It's really one of those ways to connect and start to lower the anxiety level of that patient. It's really an important step. So you said, how do I introduce myself? That really is the first step, and you can't skip it. It's important. So you're in pre-op, right? So we're going to say, hi, I'm Melanie, your nurse.
Okay.
Hola.
Hola.
Soy Melanie.
Soy Melanie.
Su enfermera.
Su enfermera.
Muy bien, Melanie.
Gracias.
And I have to say, another cultural note here, a handshake or a touch on the arm, when you're saying this, depending on what you're comfortable with. I mean, in COVID times, I don't know if you're able to shake a patient's hand, have that kind of contact, but if you're comfortable with that at this point, it's a good idea. In general, I'm talking in general, Spanish-speaking patients, Hispanic patients, they have more contact, closer talking. We don't have so much of that, bubble space that we have where you don't have as close of a proximity. So a handshake or touch on the arm when you're introducing yourself would be a nice addition.
What about eye contact? Is eye contact considered good or considered not so good?
Yes, eye contact. Great.
Okay.
Smile. I know you have the mask on, but you do have.
Oh, yeah. Your eyes still show it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Smile with your eyes, eye contact. Yes. Yes. All of those are a great way to introduce yourself, to start to connect and bring that anxiety level down. ¿Cuál es su nombre? What's your name? It's another way. You want to do that one, Melanie?
¿Cuál es su nombre?
Muy bien.
I know that phrase.
Sí.
But yeah,
Sí,
you're right.
señora.
We need to tell them who we are, ask them who they are, because we need to confirm it on their chart anyway and find out. And then after we ask them what their name is, we're going to ask them what their birthday is. So how do we ask them what their birthday is?
And one quick note on the name, just taking a moment to make sure you're pronouncing it right.
Oh, yeah. That's
I say Melanie, if I ask you and you say no, Melanie, and now I know because you want to use that name. You want to keep using their name.
Especially when they're waking up from anesthesia, they're going to respond to their name. So we do need to make sure we get that pronunciation correct.
Yeah. Just taking a moment to make sure you have that right. And your next one was?
When's your day? Usually I would ask, tell me your name and then give me your date of birth or ask them what their birthday is.
And you've already done your hablo un poco de español, right? Habla inglés usted. Like you're trying to figure out, we're both language learners. We already connect in this way. So you can ask them these things while you're introducing yourself too. Don't skip all of that because it's an important part of being able to connect. So once we've done all that, date of birth. Yeah, because you have to get all of this confirmed, right? Before you're wheeling them in. So date of birth, this is an interesting one because the word for birth in Spanish is longer than in English. So we can do, I got a really good suggestion from one of my clients the other day. She said, can I just use cumpleaños?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And I was like, that's a really simple way to do this. I like that. So if you say with your voice like that, su cumpleaños.
And raise it like a question.
Yep. You could do that. You could also say fecha de nacimiento.
Nacimiento.
Oh, muy
Fecha
bien.
Fecha de nacimiento.
Exacto.
See?
Exacto.
I learned something new. Nacimiento.
Wow.
Interesting.
That was 4 syllables, like rapid. You're like the rapid fire Spanish stage.
I told you, I've taken Spanish a lot. It's just back in the depths of my brain. So I'm pulling it out.
And so if you ask for the cumpleaños, you might just get a day number. They might tell you the day and the month. But if you need the year as well, which you do, you could say Y el año.
And the year. Y el año.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
Sí. And do you usually ask, what are we doing?
Yes, we ask what
Today.
we're doing. Yes.
Okay.
And if there's some type of laterality, we also make sure they tell us what side of the body, as well. So right or left,
Okay.
Oh, I used to remember what right and left was.
Oh, vamos, Justin.
You can do it.
What was it? I can't do it. I cannot find it in the 35 years recessed in my brain. I can't do it. Give me one of them. Give me one of them and let me see if I can guess the other.
Melanie?
Okay, I only know, I think it's right, but it's derecha, correct? Derecha de?
Okay,
Derecha.
no, there's no way I remember.
I can't remember left.
Because the left is a lot harder than the right. I was hoping
Maybe
you were
that's
going
why.
to give him the left.
I definitely have no idea. I definitely do not remember. I know we learned it, but I do not remember.
Well, I guess it's not so much harder than the right, but it's left. Izquierda.
Oh, yeah, izquierda. That's right. Yeah, okay.
No.
Izquierda and derecha.
Mm-hmm. Derecha is right. Izquierda, left. So if we're just asking, what are we doing for you today? ¿Qué vamos a hacer?
Hacer. ¿Qué vamos a hacer?
Mm-hmm. Para usted
Para usted.
hoy.
Oh, hoy. Yeah, today. Say it all together. I can't remember it all.
¿Puedes, Melanie? Oh, ¿yo?
You.
¿Qué vamos a hacer para usted hoy?
¿Qué vamos a hacer para usted hoy?
Exacto.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. That was a long one, Justin? That was a long one? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, I would definitely, I can see this cheat sheet that you have being incredibly valuable because it wouldn't be so hard to say it once I kind of knew, but to have just something I can go to for some of these routine sort of questions. I think the harder part would be preparing for the answer to know when you didn't get all the information that you need, like Iano. Like, I feel like there's like a little follow-up piece there to make sure that, you actually, what was communicated back to you as an answer to the question was correct. What about allergies? I mean, this is a really big one that we have to make sure we know too, is whether or not they're allergic to any medicines. Is how would we ask that one?
Let's Melanie, can you start us? First word?
Well, let's see. No, now you put me on the spot. Now I can't think again.
That's what you get for being the all-star student, Melanie.
Exactly. But it would be tienes, correct? Do you have tienes?
You can use tienes, and for the formal way to say it, like if you're speaking with an adult, tiene.
Tiene? Allergies. That's what I would
tiene.
say.
And you might actually be understood if you say allergies because it's similar to Spanish. Okay. So that's where like the Spanglish things come in. If you really don't know, try the English because you might be surprised at how much your patient understands. They may just not be able to speak it. Speak the English back to you. So alergias.
Alergias. Tiene alergias.
Oh, that's so close.
That is really close. Yeah. Alergias.
And if you make it into a question, tiene alergias?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I got it.
That is an important one to know pre-op. Well, there's also, you can tell me what else, but there's one I would add into.
Oh, I want to hear
roll
it.
In.
Yep, do it.
Okay, you do it. What is it?
It would be, don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take good care of you.
That's actually what I was going to say. The very last thing that I tell them is we're going to take very good care of you. And we'll, usually something to that effect every time, no matter what language my patient speaks. But I always tell them that. So how would I say that in Spanish?
Melanie, I want you to be my nurse, por favor.
Well, I'll just come out anytime. You just let me know.
Mi enfermera, por favor. Okay. Don't worry. And the name again. Here comes the name. So you're going to want to know how to pronounce the name. So, no se preocupe, Melanie.
You got to say that again.
Yep.
And I'm going to use Justin this time. No se preocupe, Justin.
No se... Say it again.
That's a hard one.
The last little word. Preocupe.
Preocupe.
Or coupe.
Preocupe.
So that was 3 words. No se
Say
preocupe.
No se preocupe.
preocupe. Okay. And
No
then you
se
put their
preocupe.
name.
Muy bien. And then, okay, no se preocupe, Justin. And then we're going to take good care of you. Vamos. I bet you know that one. Vamos. Vamos a cuidar.
Vamos a cuidar.
Vamos a cuidar muy bien
Muy bien.
de usted.
De usted.
Wow, vamos has a lot of different uses, doesn't it?
Vamos can mean let's go.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
It can also mean we are going to, and then you have to say what you're going to do. So in this case, vamos a cuidar. Cuidar is to take care of.
Vamos a cuidar.
Muy bien.
Muy bien.
De usted.
De usted. I was like, I know there's something before usted, and I couldn't remember it.
Of you instead of and you. I remember eosted.
Yeah.
Right. But de usted is of you instead of and you, eosted. Okay.
Is it coming back, Justin? The E?
You're definitely,
a little bit.
there's like the recesses in my mind. There's like neurons that are firing that have been like, whoa, we've been like out of it for 35 years. So, wow.
Excelente.
Yeah, that vamos a, though, is something that I always remembered because it's we are going to. And so if I could remember vamos a, we are going to, and then suddenly I could think of my verb, okay, what are we going to do? And I could usually fumblingly put a sentence together, at least to get my point across. But that vamos a always saved the day, remembering we are going to. So that was just something that always helped me.
Those are the kind of strategies, that you want to have in your pocket. The vamos a, the por favor. If you, anything por favor, that's the first thing you say, your patient's going to be like, okay, they're about to ask me to do something. So if you want to preface with por favor, it's a really good one to have in your pocket at all times.
Wow, that's a good one to think about. Yeah, I need to remember that too. Por favor. Because that's not how we start our speech in English. We don't usually start with just please, so we don't think to say that first.
It's kind of nice. There's manners built in.
Yeah, right? Manners are good.
Well, you kind of tack it on in the end in English, right? Could you move over, please?
Yeah, right. But to say it first wouldn't come naturally to me as a native English speaker. So that's interesting to think to put it first. But yeah, that's very helpful.
All right, Megan, this was a phenomenal interview, and it's going to be one of our longer ones because it's just packed. It was also one of the most fun ones I've done in a while, too.
Yeah.
Like, I really enjoyed this, and, I just want to thank you for sharing, kind of your knowledge and your experience. And honestly, one of the bigger surprises for me, too, is, like, coming into this, I just wasn't – I studied some communication and everything else, and I know nonverbal is 90%. But coming into this interview, I didn't even think to talk to you about the nonverbal points, like a touch on the arm or a handshake or, just something, especially when we're trying to make people feel at ease and understanding, some of that nonverbal success tips, I think that's especially in a nurturing environment. I think that was really helpful and something I wasn't expecting.
Muy bien, Justin. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And we didn't even get to the operating room yet.
We didn't. We've only made it out of pre-op, but we, in this time slot that we have. But you and I work together and put some of those important phrases together that we all ask when we're in the OR. So hopefully we can shoot that out and provide that as a resource. And also to make a plug for our group on Facebook, because I enjoy that Spanish in the Nurses Lounge Facebook group. It's just a lot of fun, a great place to learn, and nurses can, anybody really who's in healthcare can check that out and learn from that group, because you do a great job.
Honestly, Megan, I think we could totally just do like a little video at some point on First Case with some of the operating room phrases. Like, we should totally have you on and do like a LinkedIn Live or something along those lines. That would be so much fun. That would be a lot of fun.
I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love that. The cheat sheet's one thing, but having the visual is, the body language.
Yes,
and you can see pronunciation. Yeah.
Yes, I was staring at your mouth when you were saying a couple words a minute ago that I'd never heard before. So yeah, you definitely need the video as well.
Nacimiento. Though you nailed that one.
Yeah. No, it's the other one. I've already forgot the word too. I'm going to have to go back and look it up. The one I couldn't say. So anyway.
Anyway, great job. Really great job. This is one of my favorite episodes. Thank you.
This was good.
Oh, I'm happy to come back and do Más Español whenever you want. And I need to hear some more of those stories where you're flipping through the book, Justin.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have so many other stories on so many other topics, but it's a life in healthcare.
Es la vida.
Sí.
Es la vida.
All right, that was Meghan Codd, owner of Mi Vida Spanish. And Melanie, great conversation today with Meghan and some helpful tips. But honestly, we all need resources. We all need tools. And I love that she's going to put together this cheat sheet, which will be available on the smartphone app for Android or iPhone as bonus content. So if you download the app, go over to this episode and click the gift box. Once you open up the episode, you'll be able to pull up that PDF and download this resource, which I think can be incredibly helpful. And I meant it, Melanie, when I said, let's do a LinkedIn Live and get into some of those OR phrases that we didn't touch on in this interview. But I think introducing just some of the concepts and ultimately that nonverbal communication. I mean, 90% of communication is nonverbal. And a lot of times we don't even think to talk about that because it's something that's just sort of inherent in culture. But when you're talking about different cultures, it's really good for us to be keeping that in mind as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you never want to do the wrong thing with a patient and insult them. And when you're dealing with patients of different cultures, sometimes you don't know what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do, but you always want to make sure your patients are comfortable and are put at ease. And so knowing the right thing to do just helps it go a little bit further with that nonverbal communication to put your patients at ease. And then just being able to just say the basics so that you can communicate with your patient, I think is huge. And it goes a long way for them knowing that you're at least making the effort and you're trying to communicate with them. And they understand that and recognize that as well. So Meghan just did a great job. And I'm really thankful that she took the time to teach us some stuff. But yes, the LinkedIn Live video will be coming for sure.
Mm-hmm. This was a great episode. And I'm just going to plug it one more time. The smartphone app for iPhone and Android, you'll find the bonus content, the downloadable resource, the cheat sheet in a PDF format. And in talking with Meghan, there may be a link to her actually saying the phrases as well built into the PDF, which will give you a lot of good guidance and help you with pronunciation of some of those phrases. And if you're downloading the smartphone app, while you're there, we would love a rating and a review because your feedback's important. We want you to engage with us on LinkedIn and Facebook, social media, etc. So if you like this episode, make sure that you at least like the post on social media. We love it if you shared it out. Maybe there's colleagues of yours that aren't aware of the First Case podcast who could really use this resource. Feel free to share it with them as well. And honestly, if you do have feedback for the show, like other guests that you would recommend or topics that you'd like to hear us talk about, just send an email to info@firstcasemedia.com and Melanie or myself will get back to you. And on behalf of Melanie and myself, thank you for listening to this episode of First Case.